did not have that many slides. Pleased to hear us as well.
Hopefully.
So what do you?
I'm an organ at Cranmer. Okay. So generally interested in how Christianity, spirituality engages with the internet and digital stuff. I guess. Yeah.
And I did a degree at Cambridge in theology. And then my final year I was looking at the anthropology of religion. So this is right up my street.
Was it the anthropology of religion related to media in any way?
Yeah. So in one of my papers, in my final year, I was looking specifically at the rise and the growth of cults and the role of media in future. So,
Okay.
So we come up for a lot.
I'm working now, and I was over in Sunderland, and today's pretty much a day off in Sunderland doing nothing. So looking up what talks can go to anywhere nearby. I saw this, and I thought I might as well go to Durham today.
Oh, hello. Come and join.
So what do you religious movements and the internet?
Yeah, well, obviously we were looking at the role. I initially started with the role of media
Are you joining us?
Absolutely.
in televangelism.
I brought my banana.
And then we started looking at the rise of North Americas. So
Right.
yeah,
Just a second. Top of your head's in it.
I was looking at rape. It's all very interesting stuff. And I think
Yeah. Yes, he is. He's just going to the toilet, actually.
Broadcast for posterity though. That's already
Oh, wow.
We can edit the front of the
I gave a guest lecture at the university.
Oh, really?
New religious movements in the internet.
Yeah.
It was here. They have various sociology and
Oh, good.
Yeah.
some of the
Wednesday,
HCC
Yeah.
visiting lectures on.
Yeah.
Where's Dave's
Was that
birthday?
Sorry,
the
yeah.
department?
It was theology.
Happy
and
birthday, Dave.
sociology.
Yeah. Is that your
Yeah.
I remember when I was in second year.
That's fine.
Not to say that you're in the toilet, it's all the world now. In the toilet.
How are you doing? TP. Yeah. Oh, are you not doing? Oh, I've got it in mind. It's that you haven't using this. That's a CODEC, no? Okay. Right then. Sorry. Just getting used to it. Okay, so welcome to Tim Hutchins, who is going to talk to us about Christian spirituality, not spirituality, in a media age, particularly about pilgrimage, which is a project he's been working on for the last year. So, come.
Okay. Hello to anyone who is watching on the internet. So, yes, I have a talk about digital pilgrimage. If you read under the slide. This is a project that I ran last year, based at CODEC, called the Digital Pilgrimage Project. And this is actually one of the first talks I've given specifically about digital pilgrimage, so we'll see how it goes. I'm going to try and cover these topics. What is a pilgrimage? How can digital media be part of pilgrimage, which is something I guess we can talk about later. There are lots of interesting issues to explore there. Introducing what I actually did in this project, so you can see an example of something CODEC has been doing recently. And then finish up by talking about what I'm doing next with this project idea. Can I have another slide? So, pilgrimage, as you can see here, is a number of different things. It's meant something very different in different historical periods, which is one of the interesting things I've been reading about this year. The kind of pilgrimage that people are going on in the early church is not the same as the kind of pilgrimage people are going on in the medieval period, and the things people complain about changes. And then after the Reformation, the kind of thing people are looking for in a pilgrimage changes again, and the kind of thing people complain about changes again. Now, as you probably know, there's been a big revival in the last 10 or 20 years in the idea of going on pilgrimage, going on journeys, and again, that means something different. If you go to Lourdes today, you will find people engaging in different kinds of activities than 100 years ago, and so on. This, as you may recognize, is people walking across the water to Holy Island, which is a pilgrimage that some of us may have been on already. And this here is the logo of the Church of England's Pilgrim course, which is a discipleship type discussion group that Marika would know more about than I do, I'm sure. And I'll maybe talk a little bit more about that again, later as well, because the way they're using pilgrimage here, again, shows some interesting things about spirituality and how it changes. So what's pilgrimage for? Anthropologists have attempted to work this out, and theologians, and they've come up with a whole bunch of different ideas, referring to partly different time periods, different denominations. This is a summary by Lilian Voyer, and I appreciate people watching online are not going to be able to see this very well, so we'll have to read it out. According to the Turners, I think, pilgrimage is a way to revitalize the pilgrim's sense of faith and Christian identity. So it's not just about trying to achieve something or trying to find yourself, it's about reconnecting with the origins of Christian spirituality or the origins of what it means to be a Christian in this part of the country or this part of the world. In the very early church, St. Jerome complained that you couldn't count the number of bishops and doctors and learned people who were insisting they had to go to Jerusalem because until they stood in the very footsteps of Jesus, they were somehow inadequate in their virtue and their understanding of doctrine and so on. Which is a very early example of this idea that you get a full sense of faith by going to the place where it started. Much more specific way of going on pilgrimage, requesting or promising a miracle. If you look at medieval stories of pilgrimage and pilgrimage destinations, there's a good book about this which includes lots of studies of Finkel Priory in Durham. People are writing letters saying, if I get this particular thing, which might be a healing or a fixed relationship or something like that, then I will go on a pilgrimage. And there are lots of folk stories or miracle stories, depending on how seriously you want to take them, of the people who do not go on the pilgrimage and suffer terrible, terrible illnesses and consequences for years afterwards until they finally remember, oh, I promised I'd go on a pilgrimage if such and such happened. And then they come to Durham or wherever it may be and are healed. And this is not necessarily what, for example, the Church of England is going for now, I suspect, when they say pilgrimage is the theme for our new discussion groups. Penitence, very important in medieval pilgrimage spirituality. It should be a punishment, it should be a suffering. If people are enjoying themselves too much, they're doing it wrong. That's a thing that's much complained about. A way to find yourself through mysticism, much more common after the Reformation, Enlightenment style, going on pilgrimage. That's the kind of thing you would see in the big revival of pilgrimage over the last couple of decades. You go walking somewhere and you're going on a journey to find yourself. The chance to travel. A lot of the things I've read about pilgrimage are actually sociologists rather grudgingly trying to figure out what the difference is between pilgrimage and tourism and complaining that it's not as easy as it should be. Or people who work in churches saying, well, how do we turn tourists into pilgrims? Or people saying, no, they're completely different. You can never turn tourists into pilgrims. They're just different categories, etc. But in Chaucer's time, for example, going on a pilgrimage is also about traveling. It's meeting new people. It's getting out of where you grew up. And this is another thing that people much complained about, the danger of pilgrimage, because you travel, you meet new people, you do wicked, wicked things with them. Maybe you never come home. This shouldn't be allowed. Affirmation of national identity. When Lilian Voyer is talking about this, actually, the example she gives is when the Pope of the day began encouraging people to go on the pilgrimage to Santiago as a way of re-Christianizing Europe. So it's about rather politically reclaiming the identity of this chunk of land as our land by going on a pilgrimage, and that's true in lots of parts of the world. Or, obviously the real answer, all of the above in some combination, all at the same time, usually complaining about each other. Another one? I interviewed a bunch of people about what they thought pilgrimage was. I went up to the Northumbria community and spoke to some people there. The Northumbria community is trying to reconnect to the Celtic origins of Christianity, focusing on this part of the country in particular. And this is what I was told there. Pilgrimage is the exploration of an inner and outer landscape. So you can see this is the mystical journey type idea. The pilgrimage guide, someone who is taking friends on a pilgrimage, must use history, destination, outer landscape to connect to universal human themes. So actually you don't spend too much time talking about, well, this is specifically where such and such a miracle happened. You try and find the general themes of home and exile that anybody could connect with in any spiritual condition to help pilgrims explore their own inner journey. What interested me about this is that it is a spiritual discussion, but also as part of that interview, the person I was talking to kept emphasizing that everybody has a spirituality. So in a sense, this is a Christian thing, but also any kind of finding out who you really are and who you should be is pilgrimage, and that's something that we should be engaging. Have another slide. The Grove booklet series, lots of you are probably familiar with. David Osborne has written a Grove booklet about pilgrimage. And these are some of the comments he makes there. A pilgrim is one whose journey is made for God, or at least for some deep purpose, a purpose beyond entertainment that has something to do with the person's identity or life story. So he's making a distinction between the pilgrim and the tourist. If you just get up one morning and say, I'd really like to go to the cathedral, you're not a pilgrim because you haven't prepared properly. You haven't made the deep commitment. It'll be interesting to think the argument here about one whose journey is made for God, is that drawing a boundary around pilgrimage and who gets to have the authentic pilgrimage spirituality that the Northumbria community wouldn't agree with, perhaps. But also, an argument here that I think is worth mentioning is that the pilgrimage is not a limited activity. So for David Osborne, you go on a pilgrimage, and maybe it takes a few days and you get to your destination, but actually making the pilgrimage is going on a journey, and that can increase someone's sense that the rest of their life is also a pilgrimage. We're always traveling and changing and becoming someone new. In an actual pilgrimage, the script is not set. Even if the pilgrim knows the routes and the places on the way, the encounters with others, thoughts, challenges, worries, imaginings all remain unknown and uncreated. I thought that was a nice quote. But also this comment here is interesting. So David Osborne has drawn that big distinction between the pilgrim and the tourist. If you aren't properly prepared, you can't be considered to be going on a pilgrimage. But at the same time, enjoyment is okay in the contemporary pilgrim mindset. Traveling through new parts of the world, appreciating the world, enjoying the world is a faithful response to God in itself, because God created the world. So going on a pilgrimage is a response to the act of creation. This is the opposite of the medieval panic about enjoying yourself too much on pilgrimage. Okay, so that is a summary of a whole bunch of things that people have said about pilgrimage. Hopefully showing that pilgrimage today tends to be thought of as around the idea of journey, preparing yourself for a journey. You go on a pilgrimage in order to think about who you are and who you'd like to be, how you might wish to change. The specific destination, I think, is rather less important in that way of thinking about pilgrimage. There's less of a focus in the readings that I've come across on going to a particular place in order to pray, or because a particular saint is particularly good at achieving certain things, or whatever. So, digital pilgrimage, how can any of this work out online? There was actually a lot of study of this in the early days of internet research. The internet religion field started off in about 2000, a few years before then, but that was the first big edited volume. And in those early books, you find people keep going back to this idea of digital pilgrimage. Not, I think, because they were finding a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, but because there was a sense, well, probably this is the thing we should look into. This is going to start happening anytime now. So there was a lot of interest in the early years about the new rituals that people will be creating online, the online churches that people will be setting up, this kind of thing. And also the people who would definitely any moment now start going on virtual pilgrimages. So there were lots of studies of websites that would give you the sense of going on a pilgrimage through photographs and stories and sound effects and this kind of thing. So if you couldn't go to Ireland and climb the Holy Mountain, you could get a sense of what it might be like by going through this website day by day. I haven't read a lot of studies of that recently. I feel that that may have been a phase that people went through studying this, decided it didn't really work and moved on, perhaps, but you may have different experiences. Much more common now is for people who go on physical pilgrimages to use social media to talk about what they're doing. CODEC organised Sheridan Voisey's trip a year or two ago, walking from Lindisfarne to here and blogging about it every day, I think. People will also, if they were now walking to Santiago, tweet about that as they go, so their followers can find out their experiences. Social media helping the pilgrims to share their journey in real time through brief updates. Can I have another slide? Now, all of my research is on digital media and religion. I'm very enthusiastic about digital religion, but there are reservations that people have about this, which are worth discussing. Often finding out the reservations that people have about media and technology is a good way of discussing what role those media have in their lives, what they think about them, etc. These are the kind of complaints that people can make about digital pilgrimage. Isn't the physical exertion of travel essential to the experience of pilgrimage? The whole point of going to Santiago is that it takes a few weeks, you get blisters, it's really hard, very few people have done it. If you decide one evening after dinner to go to the Santiago website, you've not had the same commitment and you haven't got the same thing out of it. More controversial perhaps, if you spend your time communicating your thoughts and photos to online audiences, aren't you distancing yourself from the direct experience around you? This is the kind of argument that comes up when people talk about going on a digital fast for Lent, giving up Facebook for a while because they want to spend more time living in their home with their family and not always talking about their family on the internet. And I think probably we've all had, certainly I've had the experience of going to a place and taking lots of photographs as a pre-digital thought, and then realizing you're so busy trying to compose the perfect photograph that you haven't taken half an hour to sit and just enjoy what you're looking at. Take another step further. If pilgrimage is a journey into yourself, shouldn't you take that journey alone or with a group of people you're spending time with? With some privacy to find out who you are and what you want to change before polishing your reflections and publishing them for others to see. If you take seriously the idea that a pilgrimage is a journey that you go on to find out something about yourself and maybe change yourself and who you want to be spiritually, then is it going to hold you back if you're continually trying to make sure you are maintaining a consistent and positive Facebook profile with it? There are some similarities there to arguments that have been made about studying abroad. Facebook and social media and email have changed what it's like to leave your university and go somewhere else for a year, because now you're continually in contact all the way through the day with your friends back home, making sure that you haven't changed too much in your experience. Those are all arguments, not necessarily arguments I'm making, but I think they're worth discussing. We can come back to them in the questions afterwards. So, that is my introduction. It's also, the good first half of my talk, don't worry, that wasn't just the introduction, I phrased that much. But I also wanted to show you what I've done this year on this digital pilgrimage project. The Pilgrimage Project is funded by the William Leach Research Trust and based at CODEC. And the question here was, what would a digital pilgrimage look like? Or what could a digital pilgrimage look like? I've already shown the many different ways you could understand that. And how could churches get involved? Have another slide. Project goals. I was aiming to produce a prototype for a digital pilgrimage. And this idea came up originally in conversation with Pete. We were talking about creating a pilgrimage route that will go all the way from Durham to Lindisfarne, or from Lindisfarne to Durham. This, I like to think, is trying out that bigger idea on a smaller scale to see if it works, and then picking up lessons that we can try and apply in the future. And these are the kind of questions to be explored. What does pilgrimage look like today? I've discussed that already. How can digital media be part of Christian spirituality? How can academics and churches collaborate to design mutually beneficial digital resources? That's surprisingly difficult, as CODEC is working on this kind of thing already, but the kind of questions that academics want to ask and the sort of research findings that academics want to come up with are often just not very compatible with what churches want in their daily activities. And finally, can we learn anything from this kind of approach, a collaborative, shared building of a digital resource, about digital inclusion and exclusion and what the digital divide looks like today? So, the plan: find a bunch of churches in the local area who would like to work on this project, produce digital resources on the theme of pilgrimage, create a free mobile app, and invite members to put all of those resources on, so an app that you can take with you while actually walking a pilgrimage route, and then invite members of the public to use that app to follow a pilgrimage route, specifically through Newcastle and Gateshead, and then design an exhibition to show off what we've done. The exhibition design is necessary because even though this is a digital project, a lot of the people involved, a lot of people in congregations just aren't going to see a mobile app. They don't have the right kind of phone, they don't have the right skills or interests to download it. So it's necessary to give something back to those people as well by producing an exhibition that they can go and see in their churches, and maybe use that to explain a little bit about digital media too. So, stage one, find some churches. This is a list of the churches that were involved in Newcastle and Gateshead. If you actually map these out, this is the middle of Newcastle, the middle of Gateshead, the north of Newcastle, the west of Newcastle, and way over on the east side of Newcastle. So it's nice to have all the areas covered. That does make it a little bit more difficult to walk through them all. So the walking route goes straight from south up to the north, with side trails going across to either side of the city. And this was a strategic decision to help each church get the most out of the project. We agreed to we tried to agree on themes that suited their focus and artists with links to their congregations. So instead of going to a church and saying, this is a project that I'm working on, this is what I want to do, I demand that you give me your time to fix it, I would go to churches and say, this is a general idea for creating a pilgrimage. How would you like to be involved? And then in each case, churches that were involved came back and said, well, we're already really interested in this topic or that topic. We've got a sermon series running at the moment on this. One church had a sermon series and a whole bunch of discussion meetings on a particular topic, so that's what we decided to focus on. And in a lot of cases, not all of them, the churches that were involved already knew artists who were part of the congregation or lived nearby, and they'd been thinking, if only we could get that person to come back and run a workshop with the congregation. So I was able to help set that together. So, having recruited participants, workshops, these were the themes that we settled on. In Gateshead, the sanctuary space on the high street organised a bunch of workshops on the history and future of Gateshead, so that was very specific to that neighbourhood. In North Shields, a prayer group were already meeting up every week or so to discuss ways of praying in innovative styles, and they would like an artist to come in and help them think about that. Jesmond had a whole series of events going on based around the Beatitudes, looking at blessings for today and what might people hope for in the modern world. Heaton was just coming up to Christmas, so they were big on Advent and waiting. Benton, the church there, has some magnificent and very unusual stained glass. It was all created after the First World War to celebrate the riches of creation, basically, but including a lot of unusual details that you would not normally see as an octopus, which I'm very fond of. They also have one of the relatively few, I suspect, stained glass representations of the devil, who is popping up behind Adam and tempting him astray. So they wanted to do something about their stained glass in history. And in the cathedral in Newcastle, they decided to run a project about labyrinths. So, having done all of this, I then worked with Rob Mitchellmore, who was doing a PhD in app design at the time and has now finished it. And we designed an app to be used on this pilgrimage. It's a free app using Android, includes GPS, so you can always find out where you are, street maps, which are available open source online, images, text, sound, and videos. One of the things which you could discuss later maybe is the kind of media that are useful on a pilgrimage. My thought was sitting down to read a long text on a mobile phone screen is going to be it's going to be ungainly if you're trying to walk along, and also perhaps a break from the focus of the pilgrimage. So I tried to include images and maybe recordings of people talking instead. And my hope is that at the end we have basic technology that works for walking through Newcastle and Gateshead, but also can be then reused for future projects. So if a biblical literacy project decided to take parts of the Bible about exile, you could then plot out a route on the ground and get people to walk across that route while looking at stories and texts and listening to things on the theme of exile. Another slide. This is what it looks like. This is, as you can see, a prototype. One of the things we haven't been able to do yet, at least, is to design cool-looking icons and other things. That blue blob there is where you currently are. Specifically, that's where my house is, because that's where I was when I took the picture. As you can see down here, there's a screen, well, up here there's an About button, which tells you who funded it and what it's for. Down here there are some layers, which look like this. There's lots and lots and lots of information blocks on this app, but we've listed it in a whole bunch of different layers so you can turn on and off the kind of things that you want to look at. So if you want just the route, you can look at that. If you want the arts that the church produced, you can look at those. Places of interest, lists of Christian churches, what times they're open, that kind of thing. Places to get something to eat, and where you are currently. I also thought I should show you some of the pictures that people came up with, so you can see the kind of art that was produced. This is one of a whole series of pictures produced in North Shields using digital photography, Photoshop, and originally just dropping coloured dyes into water. So for the art workshop, the artist came in and talked to members of the congregation about what meaning you could assign to particular colours, what they were praying for at the moment. This, I believe, was actually when the Ebola crisis was just hitting the news, and people were praying about sickness and health and doctors and help for the sick, that kind of thing. So the different colours involved all meant different things within that prayer. Then they're mixed together and the photograph is digitally edited. In Jesmond, the church decided to focus on Beatitudes. And an artist came in and encouraged us to write phrases from the Beatitudes or prayers of our own onto strips of cloth, put wax over those and melt them together to make a kind of batik effect. And then also to produce new prayers about Beatitudes and blessings for today. This is one of the things produced in Benton. As you can see, I asked the congregation there to produce stained glass windows and to design their own stained glass windows. And there's a bit of a theme that came up in a number of the workshops. The congregation were very happy for the workshop to happen, but then once the workshop began, they would start saying, well, obviously this is for kids, really, because, you know, creating art is something for children. So lots and lots of children were encouraged to come and make pictures, and the adults tended to hang back. And what I actually found in the different churches that were involved was that it depended a great deal on who started helping first. So if an adult came over and sat down and said, this is a good project and I am going to do this, a whole bunch of other adults would come over. And if the first adult came over and said, well, I'm here for coffee, but my children could stay here for 20 minutes, then lots and lots of children would come over. But also, this is a great picture of a lion, so I have shown you. Gateshead, Jen Craig, the vicar there, took a whole bunch of kids from a local school on a walk around some of the more deserted parts of the town, taking photographs of parts of wasteland, and then getting the kids to create collages reimagining what those spaces could look like in the future. So it's a lot of playgrounds and loom band shops and this kind of thing. And the next one is a dinosaur, which I think is fantastic. I would probably have put dinosaurs and spaceships, so I'm glad that there was someone else out there who was sharing my enthusiasm. And the next one. Okay, so those are the kind of things that we produce. And then for the pilgrimage, those are put into the app and tied together with Bible readings and prayers to create moments where you can pause and be inspired by something as you walk across the route that's been created. A number of challenges came up in this project. I think it's worth sharing those with you because if this is an idea to be produced for the future or a prototype, these are the challenges that need to be recognised and worked on. Some of these will not surprise you. Congregations and their pastors do not always agree on church priorities. If I'm contacting the pastor first as the gatekeeper for the church and saying, this is a great idea, I'd like this to happen, and the pastor agrees, it's not necessarily always the case that the congregation will agree. And sometimes one factor of the congregation would say, brilliant, let's go for this, and another faction of the congregation would say, well, actually, I'd much rather be focused on opening our new coffee shop or something like that. And similarly, congregations are not always enthusiastic, even if their pastors would like them to be, and sometimes the other way around. In this project, I just had to go back to each church several times to make sure there was one visit to introduce them to the idea, another visit to come up with an improved workshop plan that they'd be more likely to engage with, and so on. Something that Bex would probably have thoughts on, but congregations often assume that art and digital media are only for young people. That's one reason for doing this project. By going into churches and working with them on producing something like a walking route, which is fairly easy to get your head around, you can then start conversations about digital media and how maybe that's something everyone can engage with as well. But particularly, as I mentioned already, sometimes by creating an art workshop, I was creating something that the older members of congregations assumed they couldn't participate in, which was a shame. It takes time to change this perception. I've put that in bold because it's important. You have to, if you really want people in a congregation to keep getting involved in the project, you have to run it for quite a while and go back maybe once a month for a long period of time. Because I was fortunate that this was a year-long project rather than anything shorter. And finally, another point which we may all have thoughts on already, churches can sometimes assume that people who come in and do things like art are going to give up their time for free. And if that wasn't a problem with this project because we had funding to support workshops. But if this is an idea that is then to be encouraged and promoted to churches as something they can do in their own local communities, it's worth bearing in mind that question of, well, who's going to pay for this and who is volunteering their time? Okay, so I'm almost finished. That's what I've done so far. What's next for this pilgrimage idea? Launching the app, which will be available for free download. There's going to be an exhibition at a number of venues around Newcastle and Gateshead so that local communities can come in and see what has been achieved. Beta testing, which is something we could discuss maybe afterwards. This is a prototype, so I need to get people to actually try it out, walk parts of the route and feedback how they might like future designs to be different. And through that to maybe to start conversations about digital media and Christian spirituality, how digital media can work in pilgrimage, what people perhaps hadn't expected digital media to be able to do. So how can we build on this in the future? I think my final slide, I thought I would leave you with some questions for discussion since we have half an hour to talk about them. And just these are things that sprang to mind as the kind of questions that the project has raised for me. What does pilgrimage mean? How can pilgrims make the best use of digital media? Can the digital be a distraction from spirituality, and how do you control that danger? And what might you like to see added to a pilgrimage app for future iterations? Okay, thank you very much. Those are all of my thoughts.
So quite got this in my mind. So I'm walking through Newcastle and I'm holding my phone, and as I walk, does the app pick up where I am and then alert me to a piece of art or a Bible verse or a prayer, rather like Google Maps will tell me turn left, turn right, whatever. So is the app motivated by my geographical location on the pilgrimage route?
That isn't something that this app is going to do, because this is a prototype and that would be more expensive to build in. But it will be a very good idea, certainly. It's something I've talked to the designer about. At the moment, the app has your route and it tells you where you are, but then it's up to you to remember to look at it and say, well, is there anything near my location that I can click on? Or is there a suggested part of route that walks through this area that I could follow? But yeah, certainly if there was an extended or future version of this, then that's one of the features that should be built in.
It kind of goes on. I mean, the original concept years ago when we went to the Arts Council, we talked about the pilgrimage from Lindisfarne to Durham was to have the pilgrimage route people would walk,
yeah,
and then have about 6 pieces of art, digital art, down that route, and people would connect with. Yeah, but the key thing was walking 100 miles, and opening up the pilgrimage route from Durham to Lindisfarne again.
Yes.
And it's quite interesting how this morphs into a kind of product or commodification of religion, where local people create something and that's then displayed. And I'm quite intrigued by that. I think that's sociologically significant, that we've kind of moved from pilgrimage, which makes use of digital, to a digital pilgrimage, which is about product rather than necessarily the walking itself.
Maybe, but don't you think if you were trying to open up the pilgrimage route between Durham and Lindisfarne, that would also be a product? There are many different pilgrimage routes and you have to market them and tell people it's great and produce a book about it and persuade people that this is going to be the prettiest route and has the nicest bed and breakfasts and so on. So I mean, there is that discussion I was talking about earlier about the difference between the pilgrim and the tourist and the authentic pilgrimage and the guided tour, but they do overlap and they're both products in a way. If you look at traditional and medieval and very early church pilgrimages, marketing your destination as the place to go on pilgrimage to is big business.
Yeah,
because you've got better relics than anyone else. This kind of thing.
I don't mean that kind of product. I mean, yes, you're right, pilgrimage is always a product, but it's like the map is dominated not by the route, but by the place, by the bits that you've marked out on it as pieces of art that a child produced somewhere else. It's not actually part of the route or anything like that. Has no geographical meaning to the pilgrim. It could be viewed as an exhibition that you take to a church and things like that. And so it's to some extent, it's the product that becomes the pilgrimage rather than the walk.
Possibly. There is a geographical connection because in each case, as you're walking along the route, you're seeing what the closest church to you produce. So you're walking through a parish and finding out what the people of that parish produce. One of the important issues for me here, the differences, is about who is involved in this and who is doing the producing. And that was important for the particular group of people funding the project as well. There's a difference there from the Arts Council to the Leeds Trust. The Leeds Trust particularly wanted church congregations to be involved as much as possible. So going to a congregation and saying, well, what would you like to do and how can I help you do that? Whereas the Arts Council wanted internationally reputed artists to come and do amazing things that would be of lasting artistic significance. And I'm not sure which of those. I don't think it's fair to say that one of those is more of a product than the other, or that one is less geographically located. But what we have here is church congregations coming together and producing their own art for themselves, based around themes that they're interested in, and then sharing that as saying something about this particular part of the route and this particular church that you're walking through.
Okay. It's just that the thing really gets me is we've shifted from the walk to what's created by somebody. That's just the interesting thing. It's for me, pilgrimage is all about the walk, and it's interesting that shifts. But, there's other
Maybe.
people that just
I think that the walking route itself is still walkable and long. It will be pretty tiring to do the whole thing, but one of the questions here about how this works as a pilgrimage and what could work here spiritually is whether you scatter out the pieces as I've done. So every half a mile you've got another thing to look at, or gather them together as maybe we were discussing before, so that across the city there will be 6 clusters and you walk for an hour and then you sit down and you look through all the things that a particular church produced and have a rest and pray about those and then you get up and walk again. And I'm still teasing that through in my head, I guess, as to which of those things works best, but that's what beta testing is for.
I'm very interested in what has survived and what has gone from the early, more traditional forms of pilgrimage that you spelled out at the beginning. One of the things that survived is geography, the sense that you're actually going to walk from one place to another. And it could have gone a different route. You were saying some of the earlier work was about moving through digital space rather than physical space. But you bought the geography. But pilgrimage, another couple of things about pilgrimage. One is that it's immersive. So when you're on a pilgrimage, you're not on anything else. When you're on holiday, you might go to a tourist attraction or a pub or a bar or read paper, but when you're on a pilgrimage, that's what you're doing. And the other thing is that it costs in terms of time. People didn't only say, I'm going to walk 1,000 miles. They said, I'm going to give 3 months to this. So I'm interested in why you chose to hang on to geography as a defining characteristic and why you chose to let go of some other things.
The particular vision for this project was to try and have the greatest possible impact on the largest number of churches. And I felt that it would be easier to get as many churches in Newcastle as possible involved and then visit them every week than to have one church in Newcastle and one church in Alnwick and so on all the way up to Lindisfarne. And then you end up with a dense concentration of lots of resources that have been created rather than spreading them out over a long distance. But also, again,
if you'd made a journey in digital space entirely, you could have had churches in Australia and churches in Japan.
That's true. It is a prototype, so hopefully people can take the idea and then try out future versions. And one possibility, and I imagine this is something that a lot of people are going to do, is that when I announce to a particular congregation that the app is now live, people will download it and just take a kind of a digital tour of Newcastle, looking at all, and Gateshead, looking at all the things that I've created, and trying to find their kids' work and that kind of thing, or the piece that they created or whatever. And at which point it becomes a digital pilgrimage, even though it wasn't intended as such. So there's a flexibility there in how people will end up using it. But yeah, the commitment of time is a thing that has changed in the meaning of pilgrimage with the ease of travel, for example. It is much less likely that if you walk to Santiago now, you're going to take 6 months and that you will die on the way. That's an important difference.
More like your battery will die on the way.
It's a significant point that historically, particularly if you're very sick and you're going on pilgrimage to many, many different places because the doctors haven't worked, and you're going to carry on going on pilgrimage until someone finally heals you, sooner or later it won't work.
That's depressing.
It's a bit patronising for people who actually do it because they didn't just do it because doctors haven't worked. It's their faith commitment and everything.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking there particularly of medieval pilgrims praying for healing who were specifically trying to get healing for an ailment, and could be very matter of fact. There's a particular saint, we know that saint is powerful, a lot of miracle stories have come out of that place, I will go there on pilgrimage, which is a faith commitment as well, of course. I don't mean that in a patronising way, but it's there is a health dimension to what they're doing as well.
Sorry.
I was just wondering, so I thought it was interesting that you said that one of the ways that you track the changes over time is not just the reasons that people go on pilgrimage, but also the things that people complain about with people going on pilgrimage. So I was just sort of wondering what the kind of contemporary complaints would be. What do people worry about pilgrims getting wrong? And with this project specifically?
Well, I'm sure that the contemporary concern about the difference between pilgrims and tourists has a lot of historic antecedents. But if you're going on pilgrimage to find yourself and explore your inner journey, then you're going on a kind of spiritual pilgrimage which may not be connected to Christian spirituality, which is maybe a more distinctive concern about the recent revival, or well, I mean, if you consider it a concern, but some Christians would complain about this and some would not, but a feature of the recent revival of interest in pilgrimage. This is just my reading of it, but the Church of England's Pilgrim project seems to me, from the information about it that I've read, to be using the metaphor of pilgrimage, particularly because it is about a journey that we all go on together with no right or wrong answers and no fixed destination, because what we're going on is a journey in which we all have a conversation, which is very interesting, but that's also not what pilgrimage has always meant historically. And that has its own particular set of things that people will complain about, and it might be suggested that that particular model of a discussion group with no right or wrong answers is perhaps a reaction against some other well-known discussion groups that are perceived to have right and wrong answers. So it's a kind of pilgrimage that is also a kind of complaint at the same time. One of the very traditional complaints which still goes on is the concern around who it is you're going on pilgrimage to spend time with. So if you go to Lourdes, for example, there's a lot of, and Lourdes is not a very old pilgrimage site, there's a lot of work there in the architecture of the space and in the messages you're told when you arrive, through which the Catholic Church explains to you, the visitor, that Mary is wonderful, but all of the healings are going to happen because of Jesus in the Eucharist procession, definitely not in front of the grotto where the actual visions took place. And there's I've read books about Lourdes, and there's a long struggle between different factions there about where the most important things are going to be and what processions will happen and who gets to run them and this kind of thing. I'm not sure that's specifically relevant to the digital pilgrimage project I was talking about, in terms of who will be performing miracles. But yeah, I think the way that digital media are integrated into the spiritual experience of the pilgrimage is the point that I'll have to continue thinking about myself, making sure that the images that the churches have produced say something to inspire prayer in the person who is, or in a journey in the person who is walking across the route.
I think this is one of the things that I was interested in, if I remember that the artwork coming out of the different churches was very, very different. Mm-hmm. That has one kind of richness, but it doesn't seem as though it has a particular focus as a whole pilgrimage. And I wonder whether that was something worth thinking about.
Yeah, that was a deliberate decision on my part to try to get some diversity in the kind of things that are being produced. So trying to get different artists involved with each church and encouraging each church to think about something they were interested in and they were already thinking about. And then the themes that drew it all together were hope and pilgrimage. Hope, again, being that's a theme that actually the Leeds Trust is particularly keen on, the funders for the project. But hope also ties in with pilgrimage, of course, and with the idea of inner journey and spiritual transformation that's very important to modern pilgrimage spiritualities. So then the tying together of the content in the app will also be through the kind of texts that I upload, so Bible verses and readings and things to bring out the themes that are shared among the artworks. I've been hoping that the churches involved will write their own prayers to go into the app as well, which they've said they're going to do and have not all done yet, which would also add another element of continuity to it.
Your reflection of the of the prayers and the Bible readings is a response to the artwork. There's not an overall narrative that I'm going to be experiencing from the start of the pilgrimage to the end, is there?
No.
Right.
My intention would be to make this, or has been, to make this a pilgrimage route around exploring Newcastle and Gateshead and the hopes of people who live here. And how those hopes tie in with the history of the different neighbourhoods that you're going through. And actually I think each of the projects have that connection with the history of the particular place and the creative talents of the community now and their hopes for the future. And then the readings and verses will be what I come up with, seeing those images and viewing those images through the lens of the hope theme. In a longer pilgrimage route, of course, there'll be much more obvious historical stories to tell going around the Northumbrian saints, that kind of thing. That isn't the theme that's particularly been the focus here, but that'll be the theme to focus on in bigger extensions of the project.
So my reflection would be whether it's a pilgrimage tour. And that's not criticism at all, but it's just asking that question: what is a pilgrimage? So there's the guy who did pilgrimage on BBC in the four-part series, Sacred Journey, whatever it was, and the sense that he started off up here and then went down to Canterbury and then went to Santiago and stuff like that. But there was a sense that it was the journey itself which transformed him. And which changed his mind. And you saw that gradually as he went on this long journey that kind of was mostly tourism, and I have less of a problem with that. But it was the journey itself which changed who he was, and the time commitment into it. And whether we can call this kind of short walk, which doesn't have a connected narrative, a pilgrimage at all, is an interesting conundrum. It's whether if we did another project like it, whether we'd have to call it something else.
Possibly. I think that's an interesting question to consider. If you follow the approach of the people I've spoken to at the Northumbria community, for example, and you say that pilgrimage is a journey on which the outer landscape and the resources you've brought with you help you to reflect on your inner journey and who you are, then actually I don't think it has to be a very long journey, and it doesn't have to have a particular historical story that ties it all together. But at the same time, if you think people walking this route probably are going to be residents in Newcastle and Gateshead or residents in this region, they already have their own inner story of living in the city. Which is going to tie in with or play off against the things that they're looking at in the streets that they're walking along. You could also suggest that if journey is the theme, and if, like David Osborne, who's this Grove booklet I quoted, you say that the idea of the pilgrimage is to go on a walk that then causes you to think about the rest of life as a kind of pilgrim journey. The journey that each community has been on is the journey of producing the project actually over the year. Having the idea for it and coming up with the theme that congregation wanted to work on and deciding how that theme was going to fit in with what else they were doing, and then having a whole series of workshops to produce different kinds of artwork. And hopefully at the end coming out with a different approach to prayer and the arts and new relationships with artists in their local neighbourhoods and so on. I think you could think of that as a journey as well.
Is there a destination? So I think you arrive at the church and then that's going to be destination and be able to see the artwork, or is it sort of a wander around Newcastle and then back home for tea, kind of a pilgrimage? Because I'm interested in this idea of there being, if there is a narrative sort of to it, then you've got the journey there and you've got your time there, but then you've also got the journey back. Which I think can be just as important spiritually. I'm just curious if that's a part of it.
That I'd like to leave up to the people who use the app. One of the themes also of modern pilgrimages is that people don't necessarily do them all in one go. So you can go all the way from Paris to Santiago, but it's much more common to do a few days at a time each year and do the whole thing over a longer period of time, in the same way as the very long trails in America, like the Appalachian Trail, people do over a long period of many years. So what you've got here is basically a cross-shaped route that begins and ends at churches in North Gosforth and Gateshead and North Shields and Benton. You could take that as a traditional kind of pilgrimage and say, I'm going to have probably one day, start at this church, walk all the way to that church, or go to start at my church and walk into the centre of town to the cathedral, which is what a group in North Shields decided they wanted to use this for. So then they're taking a particular narrative about their church and how that was created and how it relates to the diocese and walking that out. Or you could say, well, looking at this big cross-shaped route, I think that section is the one that I want to do today, and just try that as a shorter trip. So it gives people some flexibility about what they want to get out of a pilgrimage and how they want to do it.
In terms of that third question there, can the digital be a distraction from spirituality? I was thinking about the way in which, when we use digital media, it almost guides us on that pilgrimage. So how do we limit how much we're guiding a person's inner journey by using digital media?
How does it limit how we're guiding a person's journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think with the use of digital media, for saying these are the sort of photos and prayers and that we recommend for you to do if you're choosing this specific route, how then does it still become a pilgrim's inward and personal experience? Kind of given them the parameters in which to express. That makes sense.
One of the comments that the Northumbria community made is that you can't take somebody on a pilgrimage. You can invite them to come on a pilgrimage with you, and then your comments are the springboard for them to go and think about what they want and what they're thinking in their own inner journey. So what you have here is a route that I've suggested, and along that route you have things to read and pray about and pictures to look at that tie in with that local neighbourhood and their interests. But what people do with that is really up to them. People may find resonances in the particular images and stories that cause them to sit and pray for a while about something in their own life, or they may look through the pictures and keep moving.
Is it any different from the ancient forms of pilgrimage, though? Because the earliest female travellers' journeys, pilgrimage, what have you, they write back from their tours. You get letters sent back and to and fro and everything of what they experience. So they're kind of doing the digital media at the time, they're sending letters, but they've also got tour books or papyri and what have you, which are giving them directions of one way to go and what the next place is and where they might find some hostels and so on. Just like today, people on the tour, Camino and what have you, have the tour books and everything as well.
And the first guidebooks are books of Rome and Santiago and this kind of thing.
Yeah, so the interesting thing here is whether is the whole thing about what's the intentionality of the product, of the bits that are guiding. What's the connectivity between all of this? Because those guidebooks gave you a specific journey to follow and a route. There was a destination. And it's whether it's whether this particular format provides you with a series of interesting anecdotes, digitalia to engage with, and whether that can produce enough of a combined narrative as the ancient products did.
Yeah. But also the ancient guidebooks you're talking about would be from the 12th century, I think, would be guidebooks that, like a modern day guidebook, just suggested a whole bunch of stuff you could do when you get to Rome, including all of the holy sites and where they all are, and also all the ancient ruins and other non-Christian things that you might want to get up to while you're there. So that's not so much a single narrative as just a bunch of things and see what you want to engage with when you get here. I think this particular project had a focus and certain limitations which, with a different funding system or a different project duration, whatever, could have been changed. A particular focus here was to work with communities in the Northeast to find projects they wanted to work on, to have the greatest possible impact for those local congregations. My concern starting out about trying to put too much of a narrative into this was that this wasn't a project about me sitting down and writing a spiritual direction guide for people, which I think could be done and would be a very interesting digital project, but wasn't the project that I was working on at the time. And I think certainly in terms of future versions or future pilgrimage routes, it will be really worthwhile to think about, can we commission somebody or work with somebody or ourselves come up with that kind of consistent narrative or spiritual direction guide or something like that. That wasn't the kind of congregational engagement that I was going for this year.
Thank you. It is.
Oh,
it
okay.
is 2 o'clock.
It's 2 o'clock.
Yeah. So I would like us to say thank you very much to Tim. Thank you. We've got a handful of people joining us online throughout, which is good, so say hello to them. And yeah, so thank you. And we've got our next research seminar is Thursday, 5th of March, with Dave Stout, who is watching. Feel free to say happy birthday to him. It's called Programming Priests, the Limits and Possibilities of Online Education. Much has been written on the issues of teaching online, but what happens when we use it to train the next generation of spiritual leaders? So Dave is our research fellow who develops digital resources for formation of young resources. So yes, so welcome to that, online or offline. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I'm now going to press the off button on that.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you very much.